And we are live, I guess. Hello, everyone. Today we are going to talk about the OAuth and securing your APIs. My name is Almir, and together with me is Debarshi. And somewhere in the background we have Jonathan, who's taking care that everything works perfectly well in on the production side. So, Jonathan, if you don't mind, can we start the presentation without further ado? So here we go. The as the title suggests, we are going to talk about serverless API security. We are going to decode OAuth 2.0. So why this webinar? Why we want to talk about this? It's because people are using services like OAuth Okta or they're Auth0 by Okta, or they're using in our case, because we are mainly doing cloud and AWS, we are using Cognito a lot. And we notice that people sometimes does not really understand what they are doing. They're following tutorials, they're following white papers, and they're not really sure what they are doing, which can have sometimes some security implications. So the goal of this webinar is actually to explain you what OAuth is, why do we need it, and we are at the end of this presentation. We are going to show you the real world example. Actually, it's going to be a demo, not the real world application, but the demo application. The Barshi built a bookstore demo, and he will introduce himself later, and he will show you that application at the end of the presentation. So how we're going to do this today? We are going to talk about the OAuth interchangeably. So I will speak a little bit about the authentication. The Barshi is going to speak a little bit about the same thing, but from a different perspective and different topics. Yeah, hopefully you are going to enjoy it and learn something new together with us. So let's get started. In case that you don't know us, we are Serverless Guru. We are your reliable partner in case that you're starting your serverless journey, in case that you have your workloads on serverless but need some consultancy help, your team needs training. We are here to help you. So you can find us at serverlessguru.com, find more information about us, follow us on social media, of course, and ask any questions if you have. So at the end of the presentation, we will have obviously a you can ask questions at the end of the presentation, but during the presentation also, Jonathan will pick up your questions in the chat. So if you have anything to ask, just feel free to type and we will answer as best as we can. So a little bit about me, not much to be said. My name is Almir Zulic. As I said, I'm a principal developer at Serverless Guru. I have like 20 something years of experience in various IT areas. I work for Serverless Guru now for more than 4 years. I started my serverless journey at 2014 when Lambda was announced at reinventing the developer preview. I'm using AWS since 2012. And since I started working with serverless, I'm not looking back, as my colleague like to say. So that's quickly about me. And now I will let Debarshi introduce himself. So Debarshi.
Yep. Thank you, Almir. So hi guys, I'm David Shemandal. I'm from a serverless developer at Serverless Guru. So I've been working quite a couple of years in the serverless industry. So developing full stack application using serverless services with AWS. And yeah, so let's proceed to our next slide. Uh,
Uh, okay.
yes. So today's session, we are going to focus more on the auth and OpenID, and later we have a demo on Cognito. So we'll start with intro about what is auth and what is OpenID, and then moving to a session and what are the types of authentication we have, like session and token based. And then we will show you how we can decoding auth and more deep dive into the auth part. So yeah.
Okay, without further
Yeah.
ado, let's get started with the real content. Thank you, Debarshi. So here we go. Let's talk about a little bit of the application security from a historical perspective. So since the very beginning of the internet, or when raising the application services. Um, so there was a need. There was always a need for some kind of security. You had to authenticate your user. You don't want guests or unknown people to use your services, your software, you had to apply some kind of security. However, this is a little bit challenging when it comes to web applications. So at the very beginning, it was a little bit chaotic. So we all used to traditional authentication, and a web application at the very beginning were using basic HTTP auth, which is basically just a way to authenticate with the server. So you send your username and password in some way, and in exchange you get some kind of session. So session is initiated, and each time you want to use API or your application, you need to provide your username and password in this basic auth. So what's the problem here? The problem here is that you need to store, in case that you want to do multiple calls, you need to store usernames and password, which is a problem, obviously, because if you have native application, if you have desktop application, and you hard code your username and passwords into your binary file, it can be decompiled, it can be extracted, and it can be used. So this is a completely insecure way. So you had to store your passwords at the server. So let's say that we applied best practices and we are storing our username and passwords in a database, and we hash our passwords and we compare hashes, and we are not logging passwords, and we are doing all the good stuff to secure and take care about our confidential information. We still have an issue. So if we have like a simple web application, it's not a problem. So we type username and password and we use application in a secure way. That's fine. But what happens if we have multiple applications, or if we want to integrate with the third-party applications? Now we have an issue. So the one way, wrong way, obviously, is to create username, create account on each and every server for each application, and then we have like 10 applications and we have 10 accounts. So when we need to change password, we need to change password on 10 places. And if we want to use single credentials, there's a problem. We need to share those credentials to third parties. So it is a bad idea to provide to some random web application our username and the password from a corporate directory, and let them store and hope for the best. Well, that's not how things works and how they should work. So these are the limitation of the basic code. So how can you trust to these third-party vendors? How can you, and the problem, how can you scale? Actually, in this case, you have a problem. You have a problem with scaling. So at the beginning of Twitter and all these social networks, they all tried to solve this issue, and they all come up with their own solution. So they were solving the same problem, but they did it differently. So they all were sending some kind of data to the server, either in a post request or to the server, and creating sessions and sending something in the authorization header, but everything was different. There was no standard. So there were some joint efforts, like for everything. They created a committee, and they created web standard for the authentication to solve these issues, and that's how OAuth is born. So they created a standard. They very well defined the specification, and implementation of OAuth is now pretty much the same on every place. Initially, obviously, there was a problem. So initial specification was like I don't know, maybe 2007 or 2012 is finished. At 2012 it's finished, and then later OAuth 2 was born. The reason for that is that every beginning is hard. So first specification for first OAuth specification didn't took into the consideration single page applications, mobile applications. So when these things started to getting increased popularity, they need to solve that as well. And now then the OAuth 2 is born. So how that actually works, we are going to see pretty soon. There is a lot to talk about when it comes to OAuth. So we are not going to touch everything. We are going to briefly talk about all the concepts, just so you can get the picture. What is it? So with that being said, I will let the Barshi give us some introduction about the authentication itself.
Yep. Thank you, Alamir, once again. So there we are focused more on the two parts of authentication. One is session, and the coming slide will be the token-based authentication. So let's start with the session authentication. So here, basically, when a client goes to your application, or let's say we have a client called web application, and when we give the data like credential, like email or password, and we'll hit the server, right? So here in that case, or in case of session authentication, the server will basically store your credential in the form of session ID. It will generate a session ID and it will throw back to you in the client side. That session ID consists of all your detail, right? Email and all the other information, right? So then with the you can store in the session ID the form of cookie in the browser or anywhere like kind of local storage. And then with the help of that cookie, you can request server, and next time in future request, if you want to access any kind of other resources from your server, with the help you have that session ID, and the server will know, okay, who is the user basically, because that session ID contains your information, right? But here in the one the session ID is stored in the DynaDB, in the database, right? In a from database. So think like about the Redis, right? In memory database. But here the disadvantage for this kind of authentication is basically the scaling issue, right? So let's say your server is scaling horizontally, right? And because we have to store our information in the all in the server, right? So we don't know who if the server is scale horizontally, we don't know which server have that your information, right? So it is a for a scaling issue, we don't prefer like session authentication. But yeah, again, mostly it will help, right? So if some, let's say if we have a user A and user B, you don't want to you want to revoke a user B because he might be a hacker or something kind of that. So you can just simply go to your in memory cache, right, Redis. You just invoke you just invoke that user, because you know who is the user, right, and whose session IDs belong to that user, right? So you can just type revoke him that access. So this is the one advantage for session authentication. Coming to the JWT authentication or token-based authentication, can you go to the next slide? Yeah. Yeah, so token-based authentication is more about your like JWT, JSON Web Token based, and where yeah, it's the same thing. When you just submit your credential like email or password, it will go to the server. But here in this case, there is no database, right? So means the server don't want to know who is the user, right? Because we don't have to save in a kind of database, right? So here only one thing you have to store in the server, right, or somewhere, right? It's called the secret that will be bind with your credential and that secret key. That is a basically for decode for to JW to create a JWT, that you have to have a secret key, right, and your information. With those two, you will get the server will hit back to you JWT, right, and you can store it in the form of cookie or local storage in the browser. And from the next time, if you want to hit anything from the server, you want to get anything, you just go to that. You have to pass that JSON vector in a form of header, right, and server will know, okay, who is the user when we decode that JW token. But here in case decoding, we need the secret, right, to create when initially when you're creating the JW token. So, but yeah, in this case, this is efficient way. We don't have to keep a separate database, right? But here in this case, if you want to, let's say, first example, user A and user B, but we don't know who is user B, right? Because we don't have the information like in the session authentication, we know, right, who is the user, right? So that will be a much more headache, right? If you want to revoke user B, then it will be much more challenging in case of token-based authentication, because you don't know who is the user and whose JW token belongs to this user. So yeah, and coming to the next slide, this is all about authentication we have right now as per in the slide. So yeah, so coming to this auth and OpenID. So from here we will start deep dive more into auth and OpenID connect. What is the difference between auth and OpenID and how it's relatable? So yeah, so auth is more focused towards the authorization part, and OpenID is more focused to the authentication part, right? So on the more overview part, so we have some break down some points of this. So let's start with the delegated authorization, right? So delegated authorization, it means, right, we have the more focused or to primarily focused more towards the authorization parts. It's basically delegating your third-party application to access resources on the behalf of your resource owner. So this resource owner, client, and authorization, you will be get to know more about this, who is resource owner and who is client in the upcoming slides. But yeah, so more overly, right, OpenID Connect is basically providing a layer on the top of auth to have the authorization capabilities, right? So OpenID is more towards an authentication part. Coming to that second point, right? Accessing application without identity, right? Uh, so yeah, so auth, right? Auth is the don't require he don't require auth. It's not require any identity, right? He only needs a more focus towards the obtaining access token, right? So and with the help of those access token, you can get to your resources and you can get authenticate there with the help of access token. But in case of OpenID requires ID token, right? It's a form of kind of a JWT token, right? With that ID contains all your information, right? Your name and everything that consists in the OpenID thing. But auth is basically just access token and more focus how to get obtaining a access token, right? It's not mandatory, right? Auth is more focused towards, it means, right, your application has been authorized, not like your user has been authenticated. User is authenticate, it has the OpenID connect, right? So OpenID connect, it means, right, the user must be authenticate, right? And you have a, so then that's the OpenID concept. But auth is basically more focused towards authorization part. I means your app from where you are logging, it should be authorized. Yeah. And coming to this OpenID, yeah, so auth provides access to the API. It means, right, yeah, so once you get authenticated from the auth, you will get an access token, and with the help of this access token, you can get your resources. Like if you want to, let's say you want to access a Google Calendar, right, API. So for that, you need a Google login first, right, and then Google login will give you that access token. With the help of the access token, you can call your Google APIs, right, and they will give you the resources you want, right, or information with the help of access token. That is how the auth connects. But for OpenID, it's only required your information, right, nothing else apart from that. And yeah, like OpenID is a extension of auth2, right? So basically an extension and adding a authentication layer to auth for user identity purposes, right? And so in summary, basically with auth2 is primarily concerned with the delegation, authorization, and access to resources. OpenID connects, extends auth to include authentication to your on the behalf of your on the behalf of your client or resource owner, right? So that's how basically what do we conclude, right? Auth, what is auth and OpenID connect? Yeah. So Almir can take from the next slide.
Yeah, thank you, Debarshi. So we talked about OAuth. We started talking about OAuth protocol and how it handles authorization and OpenID to get the identity. Just to give give some context how that is a different. Just imagine a hotel room, for example, where on reception you get your you show your ID and you get your card to access room. On that card there is no information about the user itself. There is no your name, there is no your ID, there is nothing that defines that identifies you. Who are you? So it's just access. It's just access, and that is where what OAuth handles. It just handles access. So you can think about that hotel card, your room card, your room key, card key, as access token for your APIs. While if somebody needs your identity, reception knows your information. So card only contains stuff like access code, so you are allowed to access to a certain point, and it doesn't have to be only room. You can access different parts the hotel, and imagine also secure building where you have a card and you can access different offices, different floors, elevators, or stuff, and nobody. The elevator doesn't know who you are. You just provide your access key. Okay, access is granted or denied, and that's about it. That's what OAuth does. And so that is the good real life analogy with what we are talking about right now. And we are continuing to decode OAuth with its components. So when I say components, I mean OAuth roles. So the reason why I'm using these terms, and you will notice that under parentheses I do have alternative names for these kind of things. The reason for that is that in specification itself, terms like resource owner, client device, resource server, authorization server are used. Those are like absolutely correct terms, but who among us is using like, hey, do you have access to resource server? You will always say, do you have access to that API? So in our everyday language and conversations, we are using these alternative names. Obviously, I will come to resource server later. It doesn't have to be only API, but this I'm just telling you why I'm giving you these different names. So in the OAuth specification, we have different roles. This doesn't mean that they need to be that they need to be implemented, that they are always implemented separately. They can be implemented all together. But let's get started by explaining what are they. Obviously, resource owner or user in our case. So you're never going to call your your application users resource owners. So resource owners. So you have your user who has credentials and who needs to access to something. So user provides credential, and then we have a client, and the client in OAuth are the applications who are requesting the authorization. So it can be your application, your service, your APIs, your some kind, whatever. And those clients obviously needs device. So the name of this role is actually user agent. That's the official. That's also that's the that is the proper term. Then we have resource server. Obviously, resource server are resources that needs to be accessed, and they can be many different things. So this webinar is focusing on the APIs. So we are going to talk about resource. We are going to when we are saying API, we are talking about resource server. And finally, there is this authorization server. So in OAuth specification, authorization server is the only one who is taking your credentials. So when you see the application online on the internet somewhere that says sign up with Twitter, sign up with I don't know, Facebook, or sign up with LinkedIn, sign up with your Google account, whichever you. There are many different implementations. So the reason for this, you don't want to take care. You don't want to take responsibility and take care about username and passwords and securing all this stuff. And also, you want to make life of your user easier. So when user wants to sign up for a service, it needs to go. It needs to type all these information, username, password again, and that becomes boring, cumbersome, and they just skip the registration process. So it's much easier to use authorization server that already exists. So they provided, we probably all provided our information to Google, and Google knows everything about us, even our browsing history, which is scary. But nevertheless, they know who we are, and we authorize only with Google. And notice when you are authorizing to, when you are signing up for a different service, you get the user consent screen, which we will get to later. So the only place, if you're signing up with Google, for example, the only place where you are providing your credentials is actually Google. You are never going to provide, and you are providing that to the authorization server. This is the very important part. You are providing that to the authorization server. You are not providing your credentials to the applications. So if you're using G Cloud, if you're using any of the many Google services like Gmail or I don't know, Docs or Sheets or whatever, Meet. They all use the same credentials, and you never type your username and password there. So you are authorized with Google, and you are using the very same session for all of these services. And when you sign up with the application which implemented this, you will use the same authorization server. You are not going to maintain these information. And if you see that some application is asking you for a Google password or your Twitter password or everything, it's a fraud. Don't do it. So it's just the only place in OAuth protocol for the authentication is actually the authorization server itself. So speaking of authorization server, we have this OAuth model, which can be monolith or it can be distributed. So I mentioned these rules. We count them 5, I think. So, and each of these rules doesn't mean that they need to be implemented separately. So you can have your resource server and authorization server implemented all together as one application, as a monolith application, which can work okay for some extent for smaller applications, for traditional web apps. But if you're not planning to scale, but if you do plan to scale, then it's better to distribute it. So we all know. Probably if you are a developer, you heard about the term you heard about microservices and why they are good, why the distributed system is better scaling than the monolith system, and how. So the same is here. You want to have authorization server separated just because of these reasons. So you can use like hundreds and thousands of applications. You can sign up with the same credentials everywhere. So in order to do that, you need to register your application with that server. And to do that, you need to get grant from OAuth that application has been authorized to use the service. So how we do that? To register application, we have several different grants. So there is a password grant, which is insecure, not recommended. I just mentioned here for the historical reasons. So don't use that one. If you see it somewhere, don't use it, just as a heads up, because this one requires you to provide your username and password each and every time, which is not good. So don't do that. So for server-side application, in order to register our application with the services, with the authorization server, we need authorization code, and this is called authorization grant. And then we have we have a device code. So if you have IoT device, if you have some device that doesn't have keyboard or doesn't have a browser, you cannot type, or you cannot do these kind of things, then we use device code to register that device with our authorization with that authorization server. And then finally we have client credentials. So when we from the very beginning, we are talking about the credentials. Sorry, I'm just reading the question. Yeah, so monolith is better. So the question from Rufus. Yeah, thanks for the question. So monolith is better if I'm just trying this out, and the distributed is better for scaling. These are just different way. These are just different ways of the implementations. Actually, if you are using services like a Cognito, so I don't think that you are going to implement OAuth yourself. You are going for sure to use some third-party service. In this case, you'll probably use. Since we are focused on AWS, mostly we are using Cognito, but you are not limited to that. There are plenty of secure services out there, like OAuth0, for example. And if you start using that, that is actually you are already using distributed system, because you delegated authorization to those services. So if you are trying this, I would say you go ahead and pick your cloud provider, go all in for into cloud, and use what is there, and you will see the most important thing to remember here is that you need to register your application with the server, and that's about it. So server-side application, you need authorization code, and all these services does have SDKs, does have dashboards, control panels where you can enter these information. So when you see authorization code, the goal of this webinar is to show you, to explain you what that actually is, because you are typing out, some people typing authorization code without knowing what that is, or using device code, or the worst thing, client credentials. So I started talking about the username and password. So those are the user credentials or resource owner credentials. But what about the application itself? Those are the client credentials. So there is a client ID, and this is the official name. This is the term that you will see in these various services. You need to provide client ID, and you need to provide client secret. And what is the username and password for the physical user? For the device, or for the application, that is client ID and the client secret. So that's there is, because this webinar just cannot fit all of this. So there is a securing a client-side application is completely different beast. We are going just to touch it briefly. When it comes to server-side application, it's easier to secure client secret. So client ID is not a problem; it's a username. Client secret, it's a password and should not be provided to public. That's a problem, because otherwise you have a security issue. And now the question is, okay, server-side application, servers, it's fine. You put that somewhere on a on a server, and you can secure it. It cannot be publicly accessible. But what about mobile application? What about single-page application? What about desktop application? That's a completely different issue. And securing these applications, you are doing this by not providing client secret to the application itself. You provide only client ID, but there is something that we are going to talk about a little bit later. There are some ways how to secure your application, because security is not just a single thing. So there are many items on your checklist that you should consider in order to secure your application. So from course maybe, or these are just small components that you need to think about. And when you if you do it right, your application is secure. So there is a redirect URL. We're going to mention that little bit later. So since the webinar is about securing APIs or securing our resource server, we are going to talk a little bit about these tokens, how they work actually, and what they are. So Debarshi gave us a nice introduction to session-based authentication and the token-based authentication. So token-based authentication, in simple as that, is that you provide your credential, and in exchange you get some kind of tokens. So there are two main types of tokens. So there are reference tokens and there are self-encoded tokens. So reference tokens are just random string. They don't mean anything. They are unique. They are generated and provided to the client, and client use this sending those tokens in authorization header, or somewhere in the header, or somewhere in the request, and we use those reference tokens to check our database, and then we query database and we find that reference, and then we look for the grants inside and see what user can or cannot access. Actually, what it can access. Explicit deny is always the best security practice, by the way. So deny everything as default, and then allow only what your user needs. So those are the reference tokens. So there are pros and cons in this approach, and it takes a little bit more time. But in case you have questions, you can ask on Serverless Guru Twitter. You can ask on our community Slack after the webinar as well, and we will try to answer all of those. Of course, at the end of the webinar, we will try to answer as many as we can. But if there are more questions, or you come up with something later, we will also be happy to answer it. So that being said, reference tokens, just random strings, and you need to maintain your database. You need you need database, and you need to maintain those on your own. Self-encoded tokens. Those are reference does not contain any information. You just random string, nothing, just jibber jabber. But self-encoded tokens contains actually some kind of information. And a good example of this self-contained tokens are JWT tokens. You all probably used it. You all are using it intentionally or not, knowing about it or not. You are using it most probably. And these kind of tokens are visible. Information inside of these tokens are visible, so you can they are encoded with some algorithm, and they cannot be changed. If you try to tamper with the token, it will be invalid. So you can decode token to extract information from it. So also this also requires some time to talk about it, but just remember that it consists of three parts: header, payload, and signature. And that content, when decoded, content of this token are called is actually JSON document, and those are claims. And no, JW, so the question from Rufus again, do they usually look the same? Do you mean JWT tokens or reference tokens, or which token you are asking about? Well, actually, actually, you can't. You can't tell. You can't tell the difference. I mean, I can provide reference token to look similar to JWT token. It can be random string separated with dots, and it can be like three parts of that token, and you would think that it's JWT. But when you try to decode it, you will get nothing. But if you decode JWT token, you will get claims inside. You will get the expiration time. You will get some IDs. You will get many information there, which we're not going to. I would recommend you to look into the jwt.io website, and it has some explanation, and you can actually see how token looks like on the left side, and on the right side you can see claims that are that token contains. So how we are using these tokens? Well, we can send them in authorization header, and the question is, how do we validate token? So for JWT we have like two main ways to do it. So there is the token introspection, and then there is a local validation. Just remember for now that token introspection requires you to send a request to a server, and then to some link that is provided within the token, and to see that the token is valid, and so on and so forth. But this is not something that this is out of scope of this webinar. But there is a token introspection, the little bit slower way than the local token validation. Which one you are going to use? Well, that really depends on the implementation, and what actually do you need. So the downside of the JWT token is that it's stored on a client, and what happens there? So as long as the token is valid, you can make requests. So if somebody steal your token, it can make requests on your behalf. When you figure this out, because the session is on the client side, it's stored on the client side, you cannot revoke this token. It is still valid. So that's one of the issues. But when you're using server-side session, you can just invalidate that session, and the user will not be able. All devices will be logged out if you just revoke those sessions, and if you revoke all the sessions from the user, it cannot make any other requests. So for the JWT tokens, there are also techniques like this token introspection, and when you use local, when do you use the introspection? It really depends on the implementation and what what do you need? Usually, this token this token validation happens on can happen on multiple places. So if you're using AWS, but this is not limited only to AWS. I'm taking AWS just as an example. You're using API gateway, and before API gateway reach its integration, so let's say we are integrating with Lambda, which is most common way, but not the only one. We want to authorize requests. So we don't want each Lambda to check the authorization, the code token, and so on and so forth. We want to do that on the API gateway. So we implement our authorizer there, and the authorizer will take care about these things, and it will reject the response. It will reject request even before it reach the backend side. So as I said, the API gateway is a great solution. It's not just the AWS service. AWS has its own implementation, but this is the great way to secure API. So do it on the API gateway level, and if you have some integration that requires a little bit more strict validation, then after the API gateway you can do more validations when needed for the specific services. So that being said, tokens, usually JWT tokens has its validity time, like when they will expire. So lifetime. So they have their lifetime. I will try to make this a little bit faster because because there is also a demo and we don't have that much time. Sorry for this taking too long. So we can set how long we want the token to live. So we can expire token after some time, and let's say we set it for 1 hour, and when a user try to use token after 1 hour, it will be invalid. We can revoke token on the server side, but that will not change anything on the client. So this specifically also required. So I would recommend you to search for how to handle token lifetimes, how to choose token lifetimes, because you need to decide does your token needs to live short or long. So will you frustrate your user if they need to log in every 15 minutes, every half an hour, every hour, or you just want to give them to use the token as long as how many of us just clicked on remember me, and that what actually happens is that we tell the application that we want long lifetime for our token, so it can live for a very, very long time, but that can be a security issue. So it's always a trade-off, and you always need to think about those kind of things. So one more thing is so access tokens and ID tokens. That's what the Barshi was talking about. So there is OAuth provides only access token. So you get, and the analogy is hotel card, access card. So you provide credentials, you get your access card, and you are accessing to variety of places. And then what happens? If you need the identification, so which OpenID provides, that is contained in the ID token. The purpose of refresh tokens is actually so you don't need to provide credentials to get the new token. So you have access token, you have which lives like let's say which lifetime is for 1 hour. Hi Samuel. So to pass the JWT token through downstream services from a client-facing API, or to generate a new one. So are we talking to server to server application, or we are talking client to server? What kind of implementation? Because if it's a server to server implementation, then we have a authorization code for our services so we can register our APIs with the different service. So if somebody wants to use, if some other APIs wants to use our APIs, we are going to provide them authorization code. And downstream, if then there is multiple services, then another API will provide authorization code for another API. Is that yeah? Yeah, okay. Client to server. Then you have so in a Cognito specifically, you have that section where you are registering your application. So when you are registering your application, you get your client ID and the client secret. It's pretty much the same in Auth0 as well. So client ID and client secret are actually for your front-end application. So they are username and password for the application, not the user, not the physical person, not the username and password for the physical person. It's the username and password for the application. So in order to do that, I would recommend you to, if you have multiple applications, to register multiple client IDs, so that your each application has a client ID and the client secret, depending on what kind of applications you're working on, because we talked about the single page applications and stuff. But when you have multiple client IDs, you know which application is making a request. This is the reason, because with the client ID, it's not just who is making request, which user is making a request. You know from which application is coming. Otherwise, if you are sharing your client IDs, then if you share your client ID with 10 application, you have no idea. You know that I made a request, but you have no idea. Which you have no idea which user made the request. Temporary access token, yeah, it really depends on what we are what kind of implementation we are using. So temporary credentials are okay if we are accessing if we are accessing short-lived tokens, and temporary credentials are okay if we are accessing something with single sign-on. But generally, to register your application, it's not just so registering application and so it's just one part of the securing the whole flow. So providing client ID and password and the client secret for the application itself, for the front-end applications, is not everything. So you need to think about the redirect URLs. You need to think about the course. You need to think about who and how can access your application. Hopefully I answered these questions, because it's really it has material for a very long panel, and to discuss all these different use cases. So when you implement something, there is no silver bullet and one size fits all. It's not like that. You need to know your application. You need to know your audience. And speaking about your audience, tokens are also usually contain scopes, and scopes are actually, just to simplify things, are permissions. What your user can do or can do with the application, what role it takes. So in the scope, you can say, okay, this user is admin, this user is just read only, this user is so, and it can tell your client side that okay, now my client will look differently. I will show different views for this user, because it has to because it doesn't need to see all these fancy stuff. This is also, so scopes are not client-side security, it's just the information for you. Still, if you are making a request, you need to make sure that the user actually cannot access, because on the client you can tamper with the front end and you can send requests. So that's about it. So I already touched this client ID, client secrets, and so one thing about securing clients is this redirect URL, which I mentioned several times. So I will just quickly go through this so the Barshi have time to show the demo. Unfortunately, I don't think I will have time to show Auth0 demo, but that's fine. We can make the second part of this webinar just with focusing on that one. We will have demo with the Cognito. Client ID, client secret, I already said these are the username and password for the application itself. You can think about those in that way. So securing OAuth clients on a single page apps, on desktop applications, on the mobile applications, you are providing only client ID. You don't provide client secret, because somebody can take it, decompile it, and impersonate your application. Redirect URL. So for the authorization server, you always provide redirect URL. This is also one of the components of securing your application. Why is this important? So when you are logging into the third-party authorization server, Google, Twitter, or I don't know, you name it, you will type username and password there, and after you log in, and you will be presented with the user consent screen. Yes, I authorize this application to use it, and then you will get redirected somewhere. So this redirect URL is under your responsibility. When you put that redirect URL, when you provide this to your authorization server, after successful login, your authorization server will redirect you, will make sure to redirect you exactly to the address which you specified. So it means that you will be redirected to your application, not some phishing up or something else. So front end and back channel authorization, I will skip this for now. So front end channel is just it's just the way how you provide request the request to your server. And it's basically front channel is basically when you are making requests with your browser. You will see this link if you're using Cognito when you are developing, and if you use any other service, you will see this kind of link very often. And basically you say, okay, response type will be token, this is the client ID I'm providing, and the redirect URL and state, and then there is a scope. You see in this case it's user is admin and so on. And the back channel is actually this is not front. Don't mix this when you. The reason why I put this on the slide is so it's not so you don't mix it with the front end and back end itself. This is not front end and back end. This all happens on the front end. This is how you're making requests to your server. But you're making this if it's within the browser, then it's front channel. If you're doing this with the JavaScript in the background, and you're making some post request or the HTTPS and encrypted content, and so that's the back channel. So those are the two options that you have. And that being said, sorry, Debarshi, for taking this long. I thought it's going to be shorter. Thank you, Philip. So it's now Debarshi is going to talk us to walk us through Cognito and show us awesome demo.
Yeah, thank you, Almir. That's a quite lot of Auth 2.0. So yeah, let's start with AWS Cognito. Yeah. So let me introduce what is AWS Cognito. It's a service from AWS where you can authenticate and authorize users from your application. Yeah, so basically, user pool and identity pool. So Cognito have two types of pool. One is user pool and one is identity pool. With the user pool, you can have access to like email or password. You can log in with email or password or some kind of federated identities to access your more over to the authentication authorization. But for identity pool, it's more focused towards how you can access AWS resources, right? So it's totally on the all the social providers you have, like login with Google or login with Facebook. So with that, you can set up this identity pool. So this demo, which I'm going to cover in an upcoming minutes, so it will be more focused towards the identity pool side, where we are showing how we set our 2.0 and how we configure Cognito with plus or 2.0 in both practical way. So yeah, so there is one more point to discuss before jumping to the demo. It's basically auth and unauth feature. So AWS Cognito Identity Pool provides two type of feature, that is authenticate and otherwise unauthenticate. So it's a very used to handy. So let's say you have a user application, right, coming from the front end, right, and you want certain users to be a guest user. You want to create certain user like a guest user, and you want to access few resources, right, some S3 or DynamoDB that can be authenticate, that can be for only for guest users. So with the help of Cognito Identity Pool, you can directly access you can do for those guest users, right? But you want, at the same time, you want some certain specific resources, right? Sensitive resources that need to be protected, right? With the and that you can do with the help of authenticate Cognito identifiable authenticate features. We will show into the demo how it look like. But yeah, the for last point here I mentioned, like it's a 3-layer restriction with IDDP. So let's say Almir mentioned, like with the help of API gateway, the help of API gateway we can secure your API gateway with the help of JW token. But here in why I mentioned 3-layer restriction is basically how with the help of AWS IAM, like temporary access, more towards secure way, you can secure your resources, AWS resources, not only for JWT. So let's jump into the architecture diagram for Cognite Identity Pool. Yeah. Yeah, so this is the architecture flow we have designed for Cognite Identity Pool. So let's jump with the flow, actually, how it look like. So let's assume we have a user log into your application, right? Visit your application, and he proceed with any of the 3 federated identity providers. So see, as mentioned, right, for now we have Twitter, Google, Facebook, or user pool. Uh, uh, you can configure with Cognite Identity Pool, right? I guess there are some more identity providers, but yeah, let's go with Twitter, Facebook, and user pool. So here, what is going on is basically, so whatever we have configured so far for Auth 2.0, it's focused on in between point 1 and point 2, right? So all the federated identity providers, right? Here, it's basically all about Auth 2.0, how you are going to authenticate first. So basically, you come to my application and you first log in with any kind of social provider, and if everything goes correct, if we log in with Google or Facebook, will give you a successful response from them, right? So that's the first point where you authenticate first, right? There's a first part. Second authentication will be done when after you successfully log in with Facebook. Let's say Facebook will give you an JW token that consists of all your information, right? Those JW token, I will send it in the form of identity pool, right? And then Cognite Identity Pool will verify, okay, this JW token belongs to this Facebook or Google, right? Because while we set up in the Cognite Identity Pool, we have to configure, right, the client ID and client secret for each social provider which we are going to use, right? So in that case, Cognite Identity Pool will verify you, right? In point 2, Cognite Identity will verify, okay, this JWT come from this social providers or federated IDP. Then okay, if Cognite Identity Pool verifies that, okay, this is the JW token is correct, and it have not expired and it has correct, then it will come down to point 3, that is the auth role. So here, what happened? Cognite Identity Pool will decide, okay, this is an authenticated user or this is an unauthenticated user. How it will decide? So it will decide based on the AWS STS, right? It's basically a service from AWS, right? So that AWS STS, we have to build a trust relationship between the IAM role and the Cognite Identity Pool, right? So here we have to mention how we are going to authenticate and how Cognito will know, okay, this user is authenticate or a guest user, right? Means unauthenticate. So with that help of AWS STS, right, we will create a trust relationship between the Cognite Identity Pool and the IAM role, basically the AWS IAM. And if everything goes well, so IAM, with the help of, on the behalf of AWS IAM, IAM will generate you a secret, you a temporary access grants that consist of access ID, secret key, and a session ID, that is a temporary credentials. And with the help of this temporary credential, will come down to point 4, that will send back to your use browser, and you can store these credentials, right? 3 credential: access key, access secret access key, and basically the session token. Then you can store in a form of a local storage or a cookie, and then uh, you can get those access key, you can bind those access key, and you can achieve your AWS resources, right? Let's say in this diagram, S3 or API gateway. We will go into a short demo, which I built for application called Bookstore, where we have completed all this setup, like from Auth 2.0 to plus Cognito, how it works behind the scene, right? So let's go with the next slide. Yeah, so this is basically the bookstore app flow demo where we have set up, right? So we have an application, a front-end application made from React.js, like this called a bookstore. And then we have two types of, as I mentioned, that Cognito Identity Pool have two type feature. One is unauthenticate and now one is authenticate features, right? So how this unauthenticate will handy in this in my application. So let's say I have some guest user and I want every user, guest user means public user who don't have any authentication done, right? So he can access my all the list of books, right, from my table. So in that case, I don't want to be those users to be authenticated, but yeah, I can show them all the books, list of books, yeah, available, right, on my application. So in that case, I can grant unauthentic, I can configure my application with identity pool with the unauthenticate configuration that I will show you in a bit. So that way, you without authentication, I can access my DynamoDB from my front end application, right? So that's how it's a Cognito identity pool I have configured. And for authenticate provider, so you have assumed, right, I will say, right, API gateway, and we'll bind that API gateway with as a JWT token, right? But here, what I meant, I don't want JW token to be my authorizer as in API gateway, but here I want AWS IAM. This time I want AWS IAM to be authorized as a authorizer as for my API gateway, right? So in that case, API gateway will first check, okay, these are all the temporary access key which you receive from the IAM role. You will store in the from browser, and then you will get those bind those access key, secret key, and session token to this API gateway when you're calling the API gateway from your front-end application. And API gateway will see, okay, because this AWS IAM authorizer set up in the AWS Amazon gateway, Amazon API gateway. So it will check, okay, these tokens are valid or it not expired. If yes, then you can see we have a verified, and it will call the Lambda and all your backend resources. And then, so let me show you some quick demo which I have built. Um, Let me share my screen to get a more clear understanding. Uh, yeah, all right. I hope my screen is visible. Yeah. So before that, how because it takes too much time to configure all the setup, I have already configured how I configured Cognito Identity Pool with the help of Sam. So I'll put down this all this setup in a GitHub repo, and I will put the link down. So in a more overview, I will set up this what are the resources. So basically, this is a SAM template. If you're not aware, we have SAM template where we are creating all the resources. So for identity pool. So let's start with phase one, basically how I configure identity pool. It's basically, you can find docs of AWS, just the same thing. And we have identity pool name. And here, one thing to mention in line 71, this allow unauthenticate identities. It should be true. If you want your certain permission, you want to, let's say I have my DynamoDB and I want my DynamoDB can be accessed to everyone, right? Guest user. So you have to set as this field as true, because it will tell Cognito that, okay, I have some configured for unauthenticated identity also, right? And here we have to configure all the support login providers, right? So basically, what are the providers you want, right? Means social providers like Google, Twitter, Facebook, or whatever. So in my case, I have only Google and Twitter, right? And we have this Cognito authorized phase two, that is basically where we are creating a trust relationship between Cognito authorized and AWS IAM, right? So you can see this STS. It is calling the STS API with the assume role with identity. Here, Cognito will check, okay, after validating the JW token, it will check, okay, this is a authenticate user or not authentic user. So with the help of this AWS STS, right, we have a role name called role Cognito. And with the help of this, if this string matches some kind of authenticate, that means the user is authenticate, and it will come down to that. It will go to IAM and it will check, okay, what are my policy attached to this authenticate user, right? So for me, I can only access to this execute API, means that is the API gateway. So that's how I can only call the for any authenticate user, I can only call the API gateway, not any other service. Same as for Cognito unauthorized rule, we have already created a trust relationship. That's just this not authenticate should be unauthenticate, right? And we have some policy right here also in case. right? So we want user to perform, all the guest user to perform only scan and get item for my DynamoDB, right? For all the guest users. This is how, and we have the last phase. We are basically how we are mapping the identity pool, right? So Cog and Unauth thing. So more of all is this, how we have set up this thing. So let's show you the demo, basically what we have. So let me go to the Postman. Yeah. Now, this is an API getter URL that I copied from my API getter after deploying my resources, right? This is the API I have right now. If I go to stages, you can see this is the API URL I'm using for my demo, and the resources is basically, if you go to the put request, right? And in the put request, you can see my authorization is AWS IAM, right? In this case, I don't have like this API gateway or this API URL don't validate, okay, if you provide some JWT, it will throw an error. It will only assume, okay, if I have some AWS IAM credential, it should be a AWS IAM credential, then only it will allow, if it's a valid, it will allow my backend resources from the API gateway. So that means basically, uh, we have some input data. Basically, this API will count your book, right? So if I want to show you the application which I have built. So this is an application I have built, and what I'm going to try is basically here I'm counting as 13 to 14, right? Now it's a like token not found because I don't have any token. So to get the token, I have to first log in with any kind of social provider, and there it's come the Auth 2.0 role come here. So basically, I don't want to give any username or password for me. Instead of that, I am using some kind of Google or any kind of social provider that already have my information in their server, and then I just use their services to identify who I am basically. So I'll just sign in with Google. It will give me this uh, choose who what is the account I have right now, and yeah, and it's just a basic login. So it will not this time it will not give the consent screen as Almi mentioned because I already have login multiple times. But yeah, so now you will get, if I inspect it, all how I configured basically I will show you. But if I go to application and if I go to the local storage, you can see these are the access key which I have to, these are the IAM temporary access keys which I have basically to authenticate my API gateway, right? So what I do, I'll just grab it, this access keys, right? And if I go to the Postman, and so the type I have to first select as AWS signature, right? Because it's a AWS IAM authenticate this as authorizer for this API endpoint. And then I have to just replace it to my access key and the secret key, which I can get as in a form of browser. And then yeah, and then we have the AWS region because I deployed in this region, and service name. So basically, execute API means here API gateway because I only focusing. And if you want to S3, then you just type S3 and this session token. Before that, if I hit this with this two credential, it will give me some error, right? The security token is invalid or expired. That's why I have to replace this session token with the one which I have in my browser. Yeah. So then session token, it is more much secure, this API gateways, right? It's not only the JWT part, it's have more secure way you can secure your APIs with the help of AWS IAM. Now if I hit send, so I have this request mail, its count will be like, let's say 16, or this book ID already exists. And then it will give me some success response that has the message have been updated. So it means if I go to my application, right now, if I go here, it's probably will be 16, right? And I can also take from here. So to show you that thing, basically how I configured this AWS, how I basically getting the signature to be validated. This is currently from the Postman side, but if you want to do the same thing with React.js, because I have done that part, you can go to my GitHub and you can see how I configured basically how I'm validating the AWS signature with the help of a few packages. So yeah. So this is the how way actually I am validating the same way how the postman is validating the AWS signature, and this is the same I have written the code for how it is how I'm validating with the help of this AWS for fetch package to validate the AWS signatures, right? So I believe this is the more secure way to validate to validate your API gateway instead of just putting the JWT token. So if you have a authorization as AWS IAM, you have to validate with those credentials, right? Temporary credential, and you can access your AWS resources with the help of API gateway and DynamoDB stuffs. Yeah. So that's it. I have for the applications are for basically it takes much time to configure to go to the every code base. But yeah, for more information, you can check out my GitHub or I will put down or you can comments in the webinar. So we'll happy to answer. Yeah. I'll be passing to you.
Yeah, and yeah, that is all we had for now. So there is a Auth0 demo and setup, but that will take too much time. We already passed 1 hour, and it's hard to keep people's attention that long. So we answered some of the questions during the presentation. If you have more questions, please send it over the social media, or you can ask now. But otherwise, this just concludes our webinar and demo. If there are no questions, then Jonathan, back to you.
Perfect. All right, guys. Well, I don't usually jump on here, but it's been kind of a common theme in the last couple webinars. So I like to come in at the close, say thank you so much for joining us on this amazing session. Thank you to Almir and Debarshi for hitting us with such great info. Perfect. I was waiting just a minute. I was trying to stretch a little bit just so we can get the GitHub link to that demo just now. Perfect. Let me make sure that I can post that. All right, guys, so in the comment section should be the link to checking the stuff out yourself. So if you have any questions, comments, concerns, or anything like that about anything we saw here today, feel free to leave them in the YouTube video once this goes live, or I guess once it gets uploaded after it's been live. That's kind of a weird way of thinking about it. Or if you see anything in the GitHub that you're interested in, you can always hit up Debarshi, or you could always message us, or even go to our website, serverlessguru.com, and then fill out a form being like, hey, I saw this webinar. I have this question, and we'll get it to the right place. We have people who are able to make that happen. So if you have any questions or anything like that, there's multiple avenues to reach us. But we really appreciate you guys for coming along. And if there's no questions or anything like that, I think we're good to close. Any last comments from either of you two? I don't want to take the last slot here.
No, thank you very much for having us. So that's all from me. And thank you, Debarshi, of course.
Thank you guys too for the webinar. It's a much more thing to learn.
Perfect. Yeah. Well, it was a pleasure having you two on, and Almir, we'll have to get you to do the demo soon. So maybe there'll be another session of this coming soon. So keep your eyes peeled for that. Look out for it on social media, and we'll see you guys next time. Thanks, y'all. Bye, guys.